or in this case, marching out to achieve what everyone was praying for, the relief of Vienna. Vienna was at last relieved after the terrible suffering which any long siege involves and great destruction from the Turkish bombardment. And soon St. Stephen's would have a new set of bells cast from captured Turkish cannon. The court returned to praise the Lord in a Te Deum sung in this cathedral. But those same Turkish cannon had provided an unexpected opportunity, one which often follows a destructive war, to rebuild the city in a modern style. And in 17th century Imperial Vienna, the modern style could mean only one thing: Baroque, deriving from papal Rome, with its soaring profusion of saints and angels, expressing for all to see the self-confidence of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. An oratorio on John the Baptist, written in Vienna in 1714, suggests religious devotion through a richness of detail and a pleasure in each swelling phrase or movement, perfectly in keeping with Vienna's Baroque church interiors of the time. While the styles may have been borrowed from Italy, the creative artists of the new Baroque Vienna were themselves Austrian. Fischer von Erlach and his son designed the new Karlskirche over the Turkish siege trenches outside the city walls. And native-born Austrians were also starting to make their mark in music. The composer of this oratorio, Johann Joseph Fuchs, was appointed to head the imperial chapel by Leopold's son, Charles VI. Although he also wrote fluent pieces for court occasions, it is for his sacred works that he is most admired, such as this elegiac music, where he recreates in the Baroque the older polyphonic tradition from the golden age of church music. As the 18th century progressed, life in European cities became steadily more elegant, but also more relaxed and natural. Artists now made a good living selling to wealthy citizens attractive views of their cities and of the life going on within them. These views of Vienna, dating from about 1760, are by the nephew of Canaletto, who also called himself Canaletto when his uncle wasn't looking, though his actual name was Bernardo Bellotto. The pattern from stilted to natural would be the pattern of the century in music, too. Opera, in particular, was very artificial in the early years. If the performers on the stage were somewhat stiff, the mood in the auditorium was correspondingly formal. For audiences throughout Europe, Italy remained the source of opera singers, librettists, and composers. And from Venice in 1716, Antonio Caldara came to make his home in Vienna. He was a prolific composer of music drama, producing as many as 4 operas and oratorios a year, and invariably giving his singers every opportunity to display their talents. This opera, L'Olympiade, was written by Caldara for the Empress's birthday in 1733. Performers in this period wore their best clothes, as for any court appearance. In these operas there were no ensembles and very few duets. What action there was took place in passages of recitative, which alternated regularly, even predictably, with static arias, each of which could last 7 or 8 minutes. The man responsible for many of Caldara's plots was the librettist Pietro Metastasio. He drew his stories mainly from classical history or from mythology. They were designed to show the conflict of reason with passion, or the choice between love and honor. Virtue always reaps its rewards, and the spectators are exhorted to place their faith in the natural justice of God and man, and among men, especially the emperor. The standard aria of the time had a relatively plain central passage between the opening section and a final section which would repeat the opening in a more decorated form. The intention was to show off the talents of the sopranos and castratos, whose florid vocal athletics were a major audience attraction. So, with the final section ahead of them, orchestra and audience could look forward to the mid-18th century version of vocal fireworks from a prima donna. 7 years after the performance at court of l'Olympiade, the Emperor Charles VI died. He had only daughters. The eldest, Maria Theresa, was a young woman of 23. And in those days, with contenders for every crown, a war over the Austrian succession was inevitable. The conflict, involving most of Europe, lasted 8 years. At Schönbrunn Palace, there stands now this great monument to Maria Theresa. Put up soon after her death, it accurately reflects the great power she eventually wielded. But the struggle had been expensive, and in her early years, economies had seemed necessary. These would include a severe reduction in the musical establishment. Her father, like her grandfather, had both performed and composed music. During the long reigns of those two imperial amateurs, spanning between them 82 years, the number of musicians on the palace payroll had steadily grown, until, under Maria Theresa's father, they amounted to as many as 130. Under Maria Theresa, the number of musicians fell to about 20. But this change did have its positive side. The richer nobility could now draw on a pool of talented instrumentalists to form orchestras of their own. The musicians traveled widely between the many palaces of Austria, Hungary, and Bohemia, finding plenty of employment and an increasing range of musical opportunities, even in the relatively intimate space of a salon or drawing room. In those days, the gulf between chamber music and orchestral music hardly existed. A group of no more than 15 musicians, directed from the harpsichord, would be enough for a newly developing form of great significance, the symphony. One of the leading composers in this new form was the German Matthias Georg Monn. By the 1740s, when Monn was active in Vienna, the symphony was a highly organized structure in 3 or 4 movements, lasting up to 15 minutes, and so was much more than just a pleasant background for courtly gossip. The way each musical idea is presented and briefly developed, to be followed by another in contrast, demanded a certain amount of attention from the audience. Here was essentially the Viennese classical style in embryo. If the cultural climate of the Enlightenment helped stimulate new developments in orchestral music in the mid-18th century, the same questioning, rational turn of mind was even more important in moving opera into new directions. A new audience, sophisticated enough to listen attentively to Monn's symphony, would be impatient with the posturing artificiality of Metastasian opera. And in this field, too, several composers were now moving towards something more natural, with a depth of feeling impossible within the older conventions.